Most retirees who delay their pension income are making a mathematical mistake that costs them an average of $63,000 in lost retirement income. I know that sounds backwards. Your advisor probably told you the same thing that half the people I work with here before they come to me. Wait as long as you can. Let the money keep compounding. You will be better off in the long run. And for some people, in very specific circumstances, that is technically correct. But here is what they do not model for you. They do not model what happens to your total retirement income picture if you die at 73. They do not model the tax cost of having all your income arrive at once in your late 60s, when NZ Super, your KiwiSaver drawdown, and an overseas pension all stack up in the same tax year. They do not model what a bad sequence of returns in your final working years actually does to the money you were supposed to be preserving. Colin Morrison came to me 3 years ago at 62. He had just been told by his bank's financial planner to keep maxing his KiwiSaver, stay in the growth fund, and not touch anything until he turned 65. That advice would give him, according to the projection, $22,000 more in his KiwiSaver balance at retirement. Colin had also spent 14 years working in Australia in his 30s and 40s and had accumulated $180,000 in Australian superannuation. His advisor had told him not to touch that until 65 either, just let it run. When I ran the full picture, the advice was going to cost Colin more than $40,000 over the first 10 years of his retirement, and the $22,000 gain his bank projected, that number evaporated completely once we modeled the tax cost of how he would eventually have to draw it down. I am going to show you 5 reasons why waiting is not always the right answer, and why the math your advisor is using may only be telling you half the story. Reason 1, the break-even age your advisor never tells you about. Here is the calculation most advisors run. If you access your pension or annuity income 1 year earlier, you receive a lower annual amount. The present value of that difference, they tell you, will be recovered by receiving the higher amount from a later start date eventually. They call this the break-even age. What they do not tell you is how old you have to live to reach that break-even. Let me show you the specific numbers. Imagine you are 62. You have a private pension that will pay you $18,000 a year if you start now, or $22,000 a year if you wait until you turn 65. Your advisor says, wait 3 years, it is worth it. Here is the maths. If you start at 62, by the time you reach 65, you have already received $54,000. To break even on the delayed start, you need to live long enough for the extra $4,000 a year in the delayed version to add up to that $54,000 head start. That takes 13 and a half years from age 65. You need to live to age 78 and a half just to be in the same position as the person who started early. Now add in the investment returns you could have made on that $54,000. Assume 5% per annum compounding. Now the break-even age moves past 82. The average life expectancy for a New Zealand male who reaches 65 is 83.2 years. For a woman, it is 86.2 years. But those are averages. Half of all men who reach 65 will not make it to 83. If you are in average or below average health at 62, the break-even math may never work in your favor. And this is before we even account for the most important variable, what you do with the income during those early years. An early retirement that funds genuine lifestyle spending, travel, experiences, time with grandchildren, has a value your advisor's spreadsheet cannot calculate. The question is not, which option produces the largest account balance at age 80? The question is, which option gives you the best total outcome across the full arc of your retirement? For most people, in most circumstances, taking income earlier and spending it intentionally produces better outcomes than waiting for a mathematical optimum that may arrive too late to matter. Reason 2. The tax window between 62 and 65 that almost nobody uses. One of the most powerful and most consistently missed retirement planning opportunities in New Zealand is the 3-year window between age 62 and 65. Here is why. Before you turn 65, you have not yet started receiving NZ Super. If you have reduced employment income or no income at all, your taxable income is potentially very low. That means you are sitting in the lowest possible tax brackets, and almost nobody takes strategic advantage of that window. Think about what is available to you at that point. If you have investments in managed funds or shares that have grown significantly, you can realize gains at a lower tax rate than you ever will once NZ Super arrives. If you have money in term deposits earning interest, that interest may attract little to no tax depending on your total income. If you decide to take an early distribution from an Australian superannuation fund and your circumstances allow it, the tax treatment in that low-income window is significantly better than if you draw it when NZ Super is already adding $21,000 to your taxable income. Here is a real example. Janet came to me at 63. She had retired from teaching at 61, had no other income, and had $240,000 sitting in a term deposit at 5.2%. That was generating $12,480 a year in interest income. Because she was below 65 with no other income, she was paying 10.5% on the first $14,000 and 17.5% above that. Her total tax on the term deposit interest came to roughly $1,700 a year. When she turned 65 and NZ Super arrived at the time, adding approximately $21,000 a year to her income, suddenly that same $12,000 in interest income was being taxed at 33%. Her tax bill on the same investment jumped from $1,700 to almost $4,000 a year. We restructured her investments in the 3 years before NZ Super started. We shifted money into PIE funds where the PIR rate was capped at 17.5%, protecting her from the rate jump. We also drew down a portion of her KiwiSaver in that window to reduce the balance that would otherwise have pushed her into the higher bracket later. The result? Janet saved more than $16,000 in tax over the first 7 years of retirement. That 3-year window was a tax planning opportunity worth $16,000, and her previous financial advisor had never mentioned it. This is one of the clearest examples of why the advice to simply wait and maximize your pension balance is incomplete. Timing is not just about the amount you receive. It is about how much of that amount you actually keep after tax. Reason 3, the sequence of returns risk you are carrying into 65. In the previous episode, I talked about sequence of returns risk in retirement, the danger of hitting a market downturn in the early years of retirement, and being forced to sell assets at low prices to fund living expenses. But here is the version of that risk that your advisor may not have modeled for your accumulation phase. If you are 62, still sitting in a growth fund, and you plan to retire at 65, you are carrying significant sequence of returns exposure right now. You are 3 years away from needing this money. A market crash in the next 3 years does not just reduce your balance, it reduces the starting point for everything that follows. If your portfolio drops 30% in the 12 months before you retire, you are starting retirement with a significantly smaller pool of assets. And unlike a 30-year-old who can wait years for recovery, you are about to start drawing. The classic advice to reduce risk as you approach retirement exists precisely because of this danger. But the specific timing of when to de-risk and how to fund your living expenses while you transition varies enormously based on your personal situation. For some people at 62, the right move is to begin drawing down the most growth-oriented components of their portfolio, now taking income rather than staying in pure accumulation mode and accepting a slightly lower projected number in exchange. For significantly reduced volatility in the final approach to retirement, Robert and Patricia came to see me at 61. Robert was still working part-time. Patricia had retired 2 years earlier. They had $350,000 in combined KiwiSaver, both in growth funds. Their advisor had told them to stay in growth funds until they hit 65 because the long-term returns were better. That advice was technically correct as a general principle, but their specific circumstances were different. Robert was working part-time and could cover their living expenses without drawing on investments. They had no debt. And their biggest concern was not running out of money. It was a potential market crash in the next 3 years, wiping out the retirement fund they had spent 20 years building. We moved them to a balanced fund, accepted a projected 1.4% lower annual return, and built a cash buffer equal to 18 months of living expenses. When markets pulled back significantly the following year, Robert and Patricia watched with no anxiety whatsoever. They did not have to sell anything. Their portfolio recovered within 14 months, and they entered retirement with exactly what they had planned for. The peace of mind was worth more than the 1.4% they gave up. And in this case, avoiding the panic selling that their neighbors did in that same market correction meant their actual outcome was better than staying in growth funds would have been. At 62, taking partial income earlier is not always about needing the money. Sometimes it is about de-risking the final approach to retirement before the landing. Reason 4, you are calculating retirement income without accounting for the healthy years. Here is the most underestimated variable in all of retirement planning. The quality of your years is not uniform. Most retirement income models assume you will want roughly the same amount of money each year across a 20 to 25-year retirement. The reality is almost universally different. Research consistently shows that retirement spending follows a gentle downward slope with a spike in the early years and another potential spike at the end for healthcare costs. In the early years, your 60s and early 70s, you spend more travel, hobbies, family contributions, renovations, lifestyle experiences, all of it. Then, spending tends to plateau in the mid-retirement years. Then, it often drops significantly in the later years as health and mobility become limiting factors. Then, it potentially spikes at the very end for residential care and medical costs. If this pattern holds, and for most people it does, then the years between 62 and 75 are your peak spending years. These are the years you have the health, energy, and desire to do things. These are the years travel is genuinely enjoyable, not an endurance test. These are the years you can spend a month overseas with your grandchildren, go tramping in Fjordland, renovate the buck, or do the things you have been postponing for 4 decades. Waiting until 67 or 68 to start your pension income in order to receive a few $1,000s more per year may mean you have missed the window when that money would have had its highest value. I have had this conversation many times. Sandra, at 62, tells me she is waiting until 65 because her bank told her she would receive $32,000 a year instead of $28,000. A $4,000 annual difference. She is sacrificing 3 years of $4,000 shortfall, $12,000 total out of pocket in her early 60s to gain $4,000 more per year from 65 onwards. The break-even is 3 years. In 3 years, she recovers the gap. That seems compelling on paper, but what Sandra has not calculated is what 3 fewer years of full retirement income during her healthiest years actually costs her in experiences she could have had. I am not saying money spent in your 80s has no value. I am saying that for most people, the value of spending what that money actually does for your life is highest in early retirement. Optimizing for the largest possible account balance at 80 at the expense of meaningful spending at 63 is not always rational. The planning question is not just what income level maximizes my account balance. It is what income level maximizes my life. Reason 5, the overseas pension interaction that nobody is modeling correctly. This is where many New Zealanders receive the most expensive piece of retirement advice. Advice that sounds correct in isolation, but fails completely when you model the full picture. New Zealand has social security agreements with a number of countries, including Australia, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Ireland, Canada, and others. These agreements directly affect how overseas pensions interact with NZ Super. The most important rule for most New Zealanders, if you receive an overseas pension that falls under one of these agreements, Work and Income New Zealand will reduce your NZ Super by approximately the same amount, dollar for dollar. If you have an Australian superannuation pension of $12,000 per year, your NZ Super will be reduced by approximately $12,000 per year. The government is effectively saying, we will top you up to a standard amount, but we will not pay you more than that just because you also have overseas income. This creates a specific situation where, for some New Zealanders with overseas pensions, the question of when and how to access those pensions is directly tied to the NZ Super interaction, and the maths is not what most people expect. Here is the situation Colin Morrison was in. He had $180,000 in Australian Super. At 65, if he took it as an annual income stream, it would generate around $9,600 per year. Under the Australia-New Zealand Social Security Agreement, his NZ Super would be reduced by a similar amount. The net change to his retirement income from accessing the Australian Super as a pension was almost nothing because NZ effectively clawed back what Australia was paying. But here is what his advisor had not modeled. Because Australian superannuation can be accessed as a lump sum for non-residents under certain conditions, Colin had the option to take the entire $180,000 as a single payment before he turned 65. A lump sum is treated differently from an ongoing pension income under the agreement. It does not automatically trigger a reduction in NZ Super in the same way an ongoing pension does. By taking his Australian Super as a lump sum at 63, before NZ Super began, Colin received $180,000 in his lowest income years, without triggering an ongoing reduction in his future NZ Super entitlement. The alternative, taking it as an ongoing income stream from 65, would have cost him approximately $9,600 per year in NZ Super reduction for the rest of his life. Over a 20-year retirement, that is $192,000 in total NZ Super income that Colin would have lost. His advisor had never run this calculation. The advice to simply wait and let the Australian Super compound had been costing Colin nearly $200,000 in projected future income. Now, I want to be clear. The specific tax and legal treatment of Australian superannuation for New Zealand residents is complex and has changed over time. This must be assessed by an advisor who understands both the New Zealand and Australian rules and your specific circumstances. What I am showing you is the principle that taking overseas pension income earlier and in a different form can preserve your NZ super entitlement. And this principle is real, consistently documented, and consistently under-examined in standard financial advice. The same principle applies to UK pensions, Dutch pensions, and other overseas entitlements that fall under New Zealand's social security agreements. Before you follow advice to simply wait and maximize your overseas pension balance, model the interaction with NZ Super. The highest overseas pension number is not always the highest total retirement income number. In many cases, it is significantly lower. The real reason most people wait and why it is often the wrong reason. Here is what I have observed working with hundreds of people approaching retirement. The most common reason people wait is not because they have run a full analysis and determined it is mathematically optimal. The most common reason they wait is because their advisor gave them one projection. That projection showed a higher number if they waited, and they assumed the analysis was complete. It was not complete. The full analysis includes break-even age modeling. It includes tax window optimization in the pre-NZ super years. It includes sequence of returns risk in the accumulation phase. It includes honest evaluation of the marginal value of spending during the healthy years of retirement. And for many New Zealanders, it includes understanding exactly how overseas pension income interacts with NZ Super, because that interaction can change the maths completely. None of these pieces are particularly complicated on their own. What makes retirement planning genuinely difficult is doing all of them simultaneously in the context of your specific situation with accurate numbers. Waiting because your advisor showed you a bigger number is not financial planning. Financial planning is running the full picture, every variable, every interaction, every scenario, and then making a decision that is actually optimal for your life. Before you wait another year, ask your advisor to show you the break-even age calculation in writing with the investment returns factored in. Ask them to model your tax situation in the 3-year window before NZ Super starts. Ask them to show you what happens to your current fund in a 30% market correction 2 years before you retire. Ask them what happens to your overseas pension entitlement in relation to NZ Super if you access it as a lump sum now versus as an income stream at 65. If they cannot answer those questions with specific numbers for your situation, you do not have a retirement income plan, you have a savings plan. And savings plans are not retirement plans. My name is Arthur Carter. I am a retirement income specialist, and I make these videos every week so that you have access to the analysis that most financial advisors are not trained to give you. If this helped you today, please subscribe, share this with someone who is approaching retirement, and leave a comment with your question. I read every single one. The link to book a call with me directly is in the description below. I will see you in the next one.